Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a weekly team up between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we talk about some sort of comic book issue, a character, particular era, a run, a comic book issue or phenomenon of some kind. It can span the spectrum. Uh, it's Mike's choice what we talk about, because I horned my way in on an event of his in which we were dealing with Marvel's full-color epic comic book reprint line, which is terrific. A little bit pricey, and you don't always know exactly what you're getting. But I have a whole shelf of them, and of course Michael has a whole room of them. He has more epic collections than anybody. Uh, but we're not doing an epic collection today. We broke ourselves free from that stricture years ago. Now we're free to wander wherever we want, and I'm always interested to see what he picks. And today he picked a gem. We have to go all. It's DC Comics, not Marvel Comics, so it's not loser superheroes going through Freudian therapy. Instead, it's real superheroes. Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman and Superboy and Superdog and the Justice League and the Justice Society. And we are going back to 1972, to a time when DC Comics acquired the rights from Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated to Tarzan and John Carter of Mars, and a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, I'm sure that I don't know the details. I don't know that anyone thought to record the details. It would be great, but I worry that people don't record these things, and so there's no way to write a history of them. I have no idea. Maybe Michael would know. Maybe Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. I mean, he's in tight with them, and I'm not. Maybe they offered DC Comics back in the 1970s a whole bunch of Edgar Rice Burroughs franchises, and not just the big two. But the big two are John Carter of Mars, which is a favorite of mine. The story of an Earthman who is transported to the planet Mars, a fantasy version of the planet Mars. And because he's from Earth with its denser gravity, he has superpowers on Mars. And that's the least of it. That was the gimmick that got the story in the door. But then Edgar Rice Burroughs created an unbelievable science fantasy world for John Carter, the Earthman, to visit over and over again and to have adventures in, and for everybody else to have adventures in. Marvelous. Visiting Barsoom, the name the natives give to Mars, is like nothing else. And that creation would have assured Edgar Rice Burroughs a footnote in fantasy history anyway. But then he did something else. Edgar Rice Burroughs did something else. He did something that a few people in the Victorian era did. He created an immortal character, a character that was not only really popular with readers, but entered the zeitgeist. That doesn't happen all that often, and it did with Edgar Rice Burroughs. He created the character of Tarzan of the Apes, who is the son of a British lord, Lord Greystoke. Goes to Africa with his wife, and she's pregnant, and they are killed, and the little boy is adopted by a tribe of apes. He's adopted by a tribe of apes, and readers of the Tarzan novels, especially the first one, Tarzan of the Apes, which is the only one that has actual literary merit. All the others are a hoot to read. They are enormous amounts of fun, but they are schlock pulp. Tarzan of the Apes, which I do not believe, I don't know for sure if this is true, but I do not believe that Edgar Rice Burroughs thought that he was going to write even one sequel to the book, much less 30. When he wrote the book, I think probably his scientific knowledge of African gorillas was a little bit on the dodgy side. And so Edgar Rice Burroughs fans and Tarzan apologists over the ensuing decades have had to make the apes that adopt little baby Tarzan into some other species of animal. They aren't gorillas. Obviously, there's something else. And Edgar Rice Burroughs gave them a name. He created a language for them and a world for them. So, and they are roughly possessed of roughly human intelligence. So maybe he had that in mind originally. Either way, the little boy is innocent of everything. He has no idea that his parents even existed. He thinks he is an ape. And he is adopted by a loving she-ape named Kala, who had just lost a child of her own, and adopted into the tribe of Kerchak, the brutish leader of this group of apes. And he grows to maturity and becomes Tarzan. a strange figure who is neither entirely human nor entirely ape. He is in between two worlds, like most of the great archetypal heroes are. He is in between two worlds. And Tarzan took off as a character. Edgar Rice Burroughs created Carson of Venus. He created John Carter of Mars. But Tarzan is one of those literary characters, much like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Sherlock Holmes, who doesn't feel like he has a creator. He feels like he's been there all along. He entered the zeitgeist. He became common intellectual property. And in the early 1970s, DC Comics got the rights to Tarzan and Edgar Rice Burroughs and decided to come out with what you would expect. They decided to launch the whole thing, get a really talented writer-artist, and create Tarzan Adventures. It's a little bit confusing because they decided to keep the comic book numbering from the last time Tarzan was in comics, from the last people that had the franchise. But either way, they launched what effectively amounts to a first issue. In 1972, Tarzan of the Apes, DC Comics, #1. Basically, it was #1. It's number 200 something, but it was #1. And when Michael K. Vaughan told me that this is what we're going to talk about, I was in a quandary. I don't actually at the moment have any hardcover anthology of these, and I don't have any ebooks. I don't have the ebooks of the Kubert. Joe Kubert was the writer-artist that DC got to do this. He was, arguably, I would say there's not much argument, their most talented person. The most talented person they could put on this book, and I'm pretty sure he wanted the job. Because he knew the fabled footsteps that he was walking in. Bernie Hogarth, Hal Foster, who went on to do Prince Valiant, even Frank Frazetta. He knew that at the time, he knew that it was possible for you to do seriously epic work on this character. And I bet he wanted to do it. He could be a harsh taskmaster, but in this case, he was running the show. And I was worried because I wouldn't have anything to show you. I would have had to held up an iPad with just a picture of the front cover. So I phoned up my grandfather, who would have been a teenager when this book came out, since I am only 28, keep in mind. So this book came out when I was a tiny child. I called up my grandfather and said, do you by any chance have a copy of that issue? And could you maybe FedEx it to me? And phew, sure enough, he did. Because, of course, there's no logistical way that I could have bought this on the newsstand. Being a raven-haired 28-year-old, there's no way that I could have done that. But here you see what I mean, right? DC puts first DC issue in big as life, right up there where you're going to see it. Because in artwork, I'm sure you art students will already know this, but other people won't. Joe Kubert definitely knows it. In art, this is where your eye starts, and it moves around like that. So that's in a prominent spot, and this, number 207, is that what it says? 207 is not in a prominent spot. This came out in 1972, and I guess my grandfather must have been an avid Tarzan fan because he bought it right away. And there you have a Joe Kubert cover. Joe Kubert could be hit or miss on covers. Some of them are really well designed and really good. Oddly enough, the DC's Tarzan ran for a long time. Many issues, I think 40 or 50 issues. And oddly enough, Joe Kubert's covers drastically improved once he was no longer doing the interior artwork. This is a bad cover. I don't know what's going on there. I think that my Deb and I were involved in that kind of a dance-a-thon in the 1950s. I don't know what's going on there. But it's a bad cover, though. And the idea of having Tarzan square off against Kerchak, which I'm assuming that's what this pictures, that idea could have been better done. You could do a cover that looks really good that did that, but this is not it. And it's not only are you wondering why Tarzan is facing a ravenous enemy with his back, but also Kubert had to do things out of proportion. I mean, you've got these dainty little toes. This arm is as long as Tarzan's body. It doesn't make any sense. But the interior, the interior is a symphony, an absolute symphony of Joe Kubert artwork. Even from the very beginning, there we have Jane Porter. You might not know her surname, but you know Me, Tarzan, You, Jane. You know the rough idea of Tarzan mythology. Look at that. Look at that detail work in the jungle. They are trekking their way along. She is looking for her lost father when suddenly their caravan is interrupted by a panther, a black panther. Now, black panthers are just leopards, and leopards will certainly not do what this leopard does. They will certainly not do it. But it's a comic book, and we need something in the way of drama. So this Black Panther attacks this column of humans and is 3 times the size of a Black Panther when this figure drops out of the treetops in front of Jane, in front of her men, once again facing his enemy with his back, and fights a panther armed only with a knife and wins. And issues the war cry of the great apes and then disappears back into the forest. Jane is confused and wants to know what on earth could that have been. And one of the men in her column says, well, that was probably the ape man that we've all heard so many stories about. And he starts to tell her the story. Now, there's no way that he would know this story, but it works perfectly fine. It gives Joe Kubert a chance to give us the story that I just told you of Tarzan's deep origin. Lord and Lady Greystoke book passage on a ship. There is a mutiny on board the ship. You can see there's violence there. I don't know how much you're going to be able to tell here, but look at how beautifully that panel, just that panel, is designed. Look at how beautifully it works on your eyes in the same principle of drawing them around in a circle to give you a whirl of violence without any cheap effects. Just wonderful. Chaos and wonderful. The pirates take over the ship. But they have befriended a man on board, and he says they're not to be touched. These two are not to be touched. Lord and Lady Greystoke. I can't keep you alive. I can't keep you on board the vessel. I've got to strand you on land. But I can give you supplies and a weapon and, good luck, and I'll try to tell the Admiralty about you and all that. We have to pause for a minute to go to the Aurora Model Company, which I'm assuming doesn't exist anymore, to give us this. This is these are some of their models that you can get from the Aurora Model Company. This is supposed to be an Allosaurus instead of what it looks like, which is a Nile crocodile doing the twist. This is supposed to be Cro-Magnon Man, who never lived when he could have thrown a rock at Allosaurus and was never able to lift 700 pounds over his head. And et cetera, et cetera. It's not very accurate. These models weren't very accurate. They were a lost land for me. I couldn't get any Aurora models or anybody else because I couldn't put models together without my beagles destroying them. Not that it matters because, of course, these models existed decades before I was born. You see more beautiful artwork. Look at the color palette there. As Lord and Lady Greystoke are left, they are stranded. That is just lovely. You get panels like that all throughout here. They decide that they will make the best of it. They will make a crude lean-to and build a home. And at one point, we get a panel with no words at all, no block description, no dialogue, just that. Something is watching them. It's not a little monkey or a lizard or anything. Something is watching them intently. Look at the bands of lighter blue against the dark there. Just lovely. Just lovely. It turns out that this tribe of apes have noticed them. They've noticed their new neighbors. And at one point, one of them approaches, and there's a fight, as you can see. And Lady Greystoke manages to shoot the thing, and it collapses on top of her. It doesn't kill her, but it does unseat her reason. So she is nuts. She thinks she's back in England now. And by this point, their baby has been born. And she is talking about how we'll send him to Eton, and we'll dress him up nice and whatnot. She has no idea where she is. She's lost in the mind. Which leaves Lord Greystoke on his own. And we get these things in very slim brushstrokes. We just move these things right along. To the point, the touching moment where she dies. Notice her face is in shadow as he says, well, no, what will happen to the two of us now? Because the baby is sleeping there in the crib, completely innocent of what's going on. Little baby Greystoke, John Greystoke, does not know anything about what's going on here. But what's going on? We get a shift in location to the jungle, where Kala, the great ape, is losing her baby. Again, no words, just lovely. That is so. If you're not a comic book artwork fan, you might not see it, but that is just lovely. We don't see the baby hit the ground. We see the stark tragedy of the moment by all this open air and the tininess of the thing. That is just, you have to be somebody like Joe Kubert to get that, to get how you should do that. And then the apes, look at that panel, they find him. And they enter the house, they tear him apart, but Kala takes the little baby. She's just lost her own baby, so she takes the little baby into the jungle, where he is raised as an ape. He is raised with the other apes. Now, Bernie Hogarth, Hal Foster, they all told these stories. Other artistic versions of the origin of Tarzan have been done. Some of them very ornate. Joe Kubert was a fan of those artists and also a student of them. He knew perfectly well the tradition he was working in here. He wanted to make a comic book version of Tarzan's origin story that would stand the test of time, that would be a thing for the ages, and he succeeded. He succeeded. The first 3 issues of the DC run are a great version of the origin of Tarzan. We get this touching scene where he is looking at himself in the water with a friend of his, and notices, why do you look so handsome when I look so ugly? I'm naked. I'm more naked and more off-putting than a snake. Okay, then if you want to join a record club, well, you've got all these records to choose from. There's Donny Osmond, Janis Joplin, Simon & Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water. There's the Carpenters and Three Dog Night. But then we move back to Random Chance. Tarzan has now grown a little more. He is a boy on the edge of teenhood when he encounters the cabin and steps into the room where he was born and looks at the books that are there. We're told that by this point, even though he's a boy, he's as strong as a man of 30, maybe more. When he steps out of the house, one thing he sees in the house is a knife. He picks it up just randomly. He's looking at the books, really. And the books are a source of one of the weirdest little details in this origin story, where he teaches himself how to read, which would not happen. Without any frame of reference, it would not happen. But when he walks out, naked as the day he was born, he encounters one of these, you can see what I mean. It's not actually a gorilla. He encounters one of these weird man-like apes, and it's not someone he knows, but he has a knife, and he decides to fight. They fight each other. And it's not a fight that he wins easily. He is bitten, he is clawed, he is bloodied. He barely kills his opponent before he himself collapses, and is nursed to health by his mother. And at the end of this issue, Jane wants to know, well, what about the rest of the story? That can't possibly be true. None of that can be true. She wants to know the rest of the story, but we get a see you next issue little panel there, because the issue is not going to give us that whole story. We have to save 8 or 10 issues, or 8 or 10 pages for a backup story. But before we get that, we get a little broken up story from the 1930s of Hal Foster telling a bit about the origin of Tarzan. The same story that Joe Kubert has just given us, which is kind of nervy on the part of DC Comics. We get little John Greystoke's first steps. We get them living rough in their cabin and whatnot. Little details, little moments that Kubert hasn't given us, or variations on the moments that Kubert hasn't given us. It's all amazingly good, amazingly satisfying for, what did my grandfather pay? 25 cents for 50 issues, 50 pages. We get a little ad where this guy here, I don't know if I'm going to make this out. That guy there says, "Sorry, we have no DC Comics." That thing where he's sitting there is called a newsstand. They don't exist anymore, but once upon a time they did, where you could get everything, just everything. The 4 daily newspapers that your town had would all go to the newsstand. The comic books would go to the newsstand and be pinned up because they were bright and shiny. All the national newspapers would go to the newsstand. The magazines would go to the newsstand, and you would go to the newsstand. And sometimes the guy at the newsstand would say, "Sorry, sold out." And the kid wants to know, "Hey, Tommy, how come you never miss your comics?" And Tommy says, "Simple. I get them straight from DC. They're mailed direct to me, personally, right to my house. And DC pays the postage." You pay, what was it? $3 And that gets you 12 consecutive issues, no matter what the comic is. So if the comic comes out once a month, your $3 will get you a year's worth. If it comes out bi-monthly or maybe even a quarterly thing, you still will. DC will keep track, and they won't bill you again until your $3 is entirely spent. And what can Tommy get if he cuts out this little box and sends it off? Action Comics, Adventure Comics, Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, Superboy, Superman, World's Finest, Batman, The Brave and the Bold, Detective Comics, The Forever People, The Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League, Mr. Miracle, The New Gods, the Teen Titans, and Wonder Woman. There's a few duds there, but otherwise a pretty good lineup. And then the backup feature. And it shows that DC was all in on the rights from Edgar Rice Burroughs, because we get John Carter of Mars. Entirely realized by Murphy Anderson. Which is a good and bad thing. Murphy Anderson can be a little bit of a static artist. He does really good static stuff. Look at that. Just look at that. That is something that a modern day comic artist would leave to a computer to do. And instead it's done here wonderfully. And John Carter goes to, we get that. Here, let me show you the Anderson genius here. We get this, the American Badlands. That is where John Carter, the Earthman, is running from. And then on the next page, we get this, the Martian Badlands, where he ends up. I'm on Mars. He has no idea why he is. No idea how he would know that. But he's in this fantasy version of Mars. And we do get, there's a little price to be paid for how static an artist Murphy Anderson can be. This is John Carter's first leap on Mars. Kind of boring. But he meets the Green Men. He gets to their nursery and he meets them. He meets these warriors. And that ends this issue. That also has a cliffhanger. We're going to follow his adventures on Barsoom. So that is the comic that we're looking at today, 1972. Tarzan of the Apes, effectively #1, the great Joe Kubert era on Tarzan, the great Joe Kubert interpretation of this character. I don't believe Murphy Anderson lasted more than that one thing for John Carter, and then other artists come on board. But Joe Kubert lasted a few issues and would come back periodically. And as I mentioned, he did a lot of covers that really should be collected on their own. I don't know how you would do that. Does DC own the rights to this artwork? I have no idea. Does anyone bother to reprint this? I know that I think when Dark Horse had the rights to Tarzan, they did reprint the Kubert era in discrete hardcovers. I think 10 of them. God only knows what that set would be worth. But who owns the right to the Kubert run on Tarzan now? No idea. Where can you find it now? DC Comics is now doing DC Finest, these paperback reprint volumes. Could they reprint these issues? No idea. No idea. I don't know where this artwork is. I don't know what kind of limbo it's in. It's a shame. It ought to be available. It ought to be readily available. Because not everybody can go to their grandfather and get this issue. And I was pleased that Mike picked this because, of course, he's a huge Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. I believe one of the 300 reading projects that he has going on his channel is reading everything by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Pretty sure that's one of them. I don't know that he's returned to it in years, but he dreams big when it comes to his reading projects. Although, even though he's a huge Joe Kubert fan, I know that, and even though he's a gigantic Edgar Rice Burroughs fan, a gigantic Tarzan fan, I'd be willing to make a prediction here. I think he'll probably deny it. I'd be willing to predict that when it comes to Joe Kubert, he's more of a fan of Joe Kubert's era on Hawkman than he is on Tarzan. And why? For the cheese factor. Because the Joe Kubert Hawkman is cheesy. And Michael K. Vaughan loves the cheesy. I'd be willing to bet. He probably wouldn't admit it. He'd probably lose his door-knocking rights at Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. But I bet that he prefers, just by a whisker, the Joe Kubert era on Hawkman, which is incredible. For me, Joe Kubert is known for 3 things. Number 1 is Tarzan. He was right when he thought that this would be his ticket to comic book immortality. He was right about that. But also, his run on Hawkman, a dumb secondary DC character that he made into something visually beautiful, and also a little bit less well-known than either of those, but I think even better, Enemy Ace. His run on a comic book about a heroic World War I German air fighter and his little dog, Schatzi. So, those three things are kind of the pillar of Joe Kubert. He's done lots of other things, but those three things are the pillar, and this is the centerpiece of all of it. And it starts here, and he goes on from here. So that's our comic for today. A really great interpretation of Tarzan. Mike and I have already talked about this, Tarzan #1, when the rights went to Marvel Comics. And John Buscema took it off. Marvel dispensed with continuing the original numbering. they dispensed with that and just gave Tarzan a #1. And they also dispensed with the backup feature. There's the Black Panther. He's probably happy that he survived this issue. They dispensed with the backup feature and just gave John Carter his own book with a #1. But they had this for forever and ever. That was the last Tarzan, effectively Tarzan #1 that we talked about in Epic Comic Book Wednesday. But I don't know what Mike is going to say about this. I know that he loves it. I know that he does. He loves Tarzan. He loves Joe Kubert. So what's not to love? He'll probably enthuse about it. But he makes his videos before I do, so I will leave a link to his video down below just in case you didn't see it. But a wonderful pick this week. We'll see if this luck can hold. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you all then. Thank you, BookTube.